I'm really happy when I'm here. It always reminds me of when I was the happiest, I think, in my life.
Nobody expected to see Priscilla Presley's name back in bold letters on a lawsuit this late in the story. For many fans, the Presley family timeline felt settled. Elvis was gone. Vernon was gone. Lisa Marie, the only child who carried his face and his voice, was gone too. Graceland still stood on the hill in Memphis. The tours still moved through the rooms. The music still poured out of the gift shops. And in recent months, Riley Keough seemed to step quietly into a role that made sense to everyone watching from the outside. The calm, steady granddaughter who would carry the legacy forward. Then new headlines started appearing. They were not about a remastered album or a movie deal. They were about court documents. They were about accusations. They were about a fresh lawsuit that pulled Priscilla Presley into another public battle. This time with people who claimed she had gone much further than anyone realized. In a world that already felt tired of legal drama around the Presley name, this one still managed to send a shock through the fan base. For decades, Priscilla had been a symbol of continuity. She was the young woman in the wedding photos, the ex-wife who still stood at the funeral, the former military bride who turned into the poised businesswoman on talk shows. When people thought of Graceland's surviving tax bills and looming bankruptcy, they thought of Priscilla walking through those empty rooms and deciding to fight for Elvis's world rather than let it be sold off piece by piece. She did not just outlast the chaos. In many ways, she organized it. That is why this new lawsuit feels different. In these recent court papers, former business partners do not describe her as a grieving widow of a legend or a careful guardian of his memory. They describe her as someone who allegedly misled them about what she could offer, what she owned, and what she was allowed to sell. They claim that behind the public image of the dignified keeper of Elvis fame, there was a woman willing to twist the truth to protect her own interests. They even tie their accusations back to the painful period around Lisa Marie's final months and the fight over her estate. Priscilla's camp fires back with equal force. Her attorney calls the claims shameful. He insists that she is the person who was actually taken advantage of, that these same partners misused her trust, mishandled her money, and now hope to pressure a settlement by dragging her name through the mud. He points out that Riley herself has stood beside her grandmother and supported her in public. From their point of view, this is not a heroic attempt to reveal a secret. It is an attack. So who is right? The truth is that lawsuits almost never tell a simple story. Each side presents their own version of events, stamped with legal language sharpened into accusations and denials. What makes this one so explosive is not only the money at stake, it is the emotional weight behind the names. When you see Priscilla and Lisa Marie and Riley appear in these pages, you are not just reading a business dispute. You are staring into the private tensions of a family that has already lived through more grief than most people can imagine. That raises a deeper question. How did the Presleys reach a point where their most personal heartbreaks are laid out in court filings, where the public can scroll through their arguments about love, loyalty, and trust as if they were reading a script for a drama series? This is not something that happened overnight. It is the result of decades of decisions, promises, and fears that began long before any modern lawsuit ever existed. To understand why this latest case matters, you have to trace the line backward. You have to go from this present moment of accusations and counter-accusations back to the trust battle between Priscilla and Riley that erupted after Lisa Marie's death, and even further back to the day Vernon Presley sat with a pen in his shaking hand and chose who would protect Elvis's estate after he was gone. Each legal document that exists now grew out of a conversation or a conflict that once took place inside a family, not inside a courtroom. There is another layer that makes all of this even more painful. When people see the phrase "massive family secret" in a headline, they often imagine something wild and cinematic, a hidden heir, a secret marriage, a locked box in an attic. What the lawsuits around the Presleys have begun to expose is something quieter and, in many ways, far more devastating. It is the reality that relationships inside this family were far more fractured than the public ever knew. Because long before this new lawsuit was filed, long before lawyers for former partners wrote harsh paragraphs about Priscilla, Lisa Marie Presley made a choice about her own mother. It was a decision that did not play out on a stage or in a press conference. It lived in legal wording and private conversations. Almost no one outside a tight circle knew it was there. And when that choice finally surfaced, it changed the way many people saw every photograph of them standing together. When Elvis died in August of 1977, the world saw a nation in mourning. Inside the Presley family, something even more fragile was happening. Vernon Presley, already worn down by age and grief, suddenly held a responsibility that terrified him. He was no business strategist. He was a father who had just buried his son, and now he was expected to keep that son's entire world from collapsing in on itself. The numbers were brutal. Taxes, unpaid bills, and bad contracts had turned the glittering Elvis empire into a maze of obligations. Graceland was not just a famous house, it was a money drain that seemed to grow heavier every month. Vernon understood one thing very clearly. If he made the wrong choice, the home his son had loved could be gone forever, and the little girl Elvis adored would inherit more problems than protection. In those last years of his life, Vernon made a decision that would echo through decades. He named trustees he believed would fight for the estate after he was gone. Among them was a woman who had known Elvis as a husband, not just as a headline. Priscilla would not inherit everything, but she would carry a kind of moral authority. She knew the man behind the myth. She understood the weight that land on Elvis Presley Boulevard carried. When Vernon died, that responsibility became real. Priscilla now stood at a crossroads that almost no one outside the family could fully see. Advisors came with charts, warnings, and simple answers. The numbers made a cold kind of sense. Sell Graceland while it still had value. Walk away from the bleeding costs and move forward with a cleaner balance sheet. From a practical view, it looked like survival. From an emotional view, it felt like betrayal. Priscilla chose the harder path. Instead of selling, she listened to a different idea, one that sounded shocking at the time. What if Graceland opened its gates to the public and invited fans to walk the same halls Elvis once walked? What if tickets, tours, and souvenirs could pay the taxes that were threatening to swallow the estate whole? It meant turning private grief into a public attraction, but it also meant giving Elvis's home a chance to sustain itself. That choice changed everything. When the first tours began, no one knew if people would come. They did more than come. They lined up. They brought their stories, their records, their memories of seeing Elvis on television or in person. Graceland stopped being just a house. It became a living museum, a pilgrimage site, and a financial engine strong enough to keep the Presley name on firm ground. Priscilla had taken a risk, and it paid off. In the eyes of many fans, that was the moment she became more than an ex-wife. She became the guardian of Elvis's world. The calm figure in black at memorial events was also the woman in meetings, budgets spread out on the table, trying to make sure that the estate did not drown. That role put her at the center of every important decision, from licensing deals to marketing campaigns. It gave her power, but it also gave her responsibility that never really ended. During all of this, Lisa Marie was growing up. To the outside world, she was the child who had lost her father and lived in the shadow of his legend. Inside the business structure, she was the future owner of the very empire her mother was helping to stabilize. That created a strange dual reality. At home, they were mother and daughter, struggling through ordinary arguments and extraordinary grief. On paper, they were also partners linked by contracts, trusts, and corporate documents. As Lisa Marie reached adulthood, control began to shift, at least in theory. Trusts that had once been built for her started to come under her direct influence. Managers came and went. New advisors brought new strategies, sometimes clashing with the old guard who had helped Priscilla. The estate no longer moved only according to one woman's instincts. It moved according to a network of professionals, all with their own ideas about what was best. Behind every new agreement, some kind of conversation took place. A signature on a document might follow a heated phone call, a tearful dinner, or a tense meeting where money and memory collided. The public saw only the results. Another deal, another company name, another announcement about the future of Elvis's image. Inside the family, each change left emotional fingerprints that never fully faded. Over time, the very thing that made Priscilla central to the story also made her a target when things went wrong. As long as the estate prospered, she was praised as the woman who saved Graceland. When financial storms rose around Lisa Marie, when questions surfaced about missing millions and disastrous investments, it was easy for some people to point back to the person who had been involved from the beginning. By the time Lisa Marie was wrestling with her own money problems and trust decisions, she was no longer just the little girl in the photographs at Graceland. She was a mother, an artist, and the legal owner of a complex estate that her mother had helped build and shape. That mixture of love, dependence, and resentment was volatile. It meant that when mother and daughter disagreed, they were not simply clashing over family matters. They were clashing over a kingdom that Elvis had left behind. And in the years to come, that division would not stay private. It would begin to show up in wills, trusts, and eventually in the very lawsuits that would push their names back into the headlines. By the time most people really noticed Lisa Marie Presley, she was already carrying more weight than anyone could see from a distance. To the world, she was Elvis's only child, the dark-haired girl who grew into a woman with the same eyes and the same haunted half-smile. Who legally controlled her estate? Not long after the funeral, Priscilla filed a petition in court. She challenged the validity of that 2016 amendment, the one that had removed her as a future trustee. The document, she argued, had problems. Her name was misspelled. Her signature style did not match. Formal requirements were not followed. To her, it looked like Lisa Marie's wishes had been altered in a way that raised too many questions to ignore. To others, it looked like a grandmother trying to push herself back into power. Riley, suddenly thrust into the spotlight as the named trustee, was left in an almost impossible position. She had just buried her mother. Now she had to defend a legal document that gave her control, while also preserving some kind of relationship with a grandmother she had grown up loving. The battle did not drag on forever. Eventually, both sides reached a settlement. Public statements talked about harmony. Riley became the sole trustee of her mother's estate. Priscilla received a financial arrangement and a more ceremonial role. On the surface, the feud seemed over. To many fans, that felt like the end of the story. The trust dispute was resolved. Control of Graceland and the Presley brand had a clear line of succession. The headlines moved on, yet inside sealed folders and ongoing legal strategies, the story was still alive. Some people close to the situation believed that Priscilla was not the wounded party at all. In their version, she had always been the strategist, the one steering events to her advantage. They were not content to whisper that belief in private. They were preparing to put it into their own lawsuit and force their accusations into the open. When the newest lawsuit hit the news cycle, it did not arrive like a quiet footnote at the end of the Presley story. It landed like a fresh crack across glass that was already strained, raising the same uneasy question that had followed this family for decades. Where does protection end and exploitation begin? In this case, the accusations did not come from tabloid writers or distant critics. They came from people who had once been close enough to call themselves partners. In their complaint, they painted a portrait of Priscilla Presley that clashed sharply with the dignified, controlled figure fans were used to seeing at anniversaries and memorials. They claimed she misrepresented what she owned and what she could promise. They suggested that behind closed doors, she was not a careful guardian of Elvis's legacy at all, but a calculating figure willing to bend the truth when money and control were on the line. Then their claims cut into the most sensitive territory of all, the final chapter of Lisa Marie's life. In their telling, the decisions made around her health, her estate, and her public image were not just tragic circumstances or honest misunderstandings. They hinted at a pattern of influence and self-interest, implying that Priscilla had put power and financial security above her daughter's well-being. On their own, those accusations would be heavy enough. But this is only one side of the story, sharpened into legal language for strategic effect. Priscilla did not respond with silence or vague denials. Through her attorneys, she went on record calling the lawsuit shameful and fundamentally false. In her version, these former partners were the ones who crossed the line, using her trust, her age, and her fame to enrich themselves. She did more than issue a statement. She filed her own elder abuse lawsuit, accusing them of manipulating her finances and turning her into a target when she began to push back. Suddenly, the narrative that looked so simple from the outside turned inside out. Depending on which set of papers you read, Priscilla was either the architect of manipulation or the victim of it. The same meetings, the same signatures, the same phone calls were described in completely different ways. That is the nature of lawsuits. They are not written to tell a balanced story. They are written to win. Caught in the middle of all of this, even now, is Lisa Marie. She is no longer here to confirm or deny anyone's version of events. What we have instead are fragments, financial records that show years of strain, lawsuits that document vast losses, letters that reveal how deeply she doubted the people around her. Even the story about her considering a lawsuit against her mother did not come from gossip. It surfaced in the middle of a legal explanation, brought into the light because someone needed to prove a point to a judge. Taken together, those pieces do not give us a neat conspiracy theory. They offer something more complicated and, in many ways, more heartbreaking. They suggest a woman who never found solid ground between love and mistrust, who lived in a world where almost every relationship had a financial shadow attached to it. It is easy to talk about family secrets as if they are dramatic twists waiting to be revealed. Here, the secret looks more like a slow grinding truth. This family never really had a chance to heal in private. Every time they tried, something else dragged them back into the open. A new deal, a broken investment, a will, a trust, a petition filed in probate court. Each document pinned another piece of their internal life to the public record. For Lisa Marie, whose entire identity was wrapped in the name of a man billions of strangers adored, that must have felt like being taken apart under a spotlight she never got to turn off. This is the context in which the latest accusations against Priscilla exist, not as a clean revelation of good and evil, but as the newest chapter in a story where grief, money, memory, and power have been tangled together for almost half a century. There may come a day when a judge rules on who owes what to whom. That will answer some legal questions. It will not answer the one that really haunts fans. What would Lisa Marie have wanted? Would she have wanted her mother branded as a villain? Would she have defended the people now claiming to speak for her? Would she have wished that old drafts of lawsuits and private letters had stayed buried in desk drawers instead of being read aloud in courtrooms? We will never truly know. What we can see looking back over all these years is the cost of living inside a legend. Long after the last show at the International Hotel, long after the last recording session at Graceland, the pressure did not disappear. It shifted onto the shoulders of the people who loved Elvis most. Vernon felt it in his final decisions. Priscilla felt it every time she signed a new contract. Lisa Marie felt it every time her own mistakes and heartbreaks led back to the same headline: Elvis's daughter. In the end, the most painful secret may not be a hidden document or a single shocking decision. It may be the quiet realization that for Lisa Marie Presley, the price of carrying her father's name was never paid only in money. It was paid in trust, in peace, and in how her story would be argued, contested, and retold long after she was gone. If you are still listening, you are not just following lawsuits. You are trying to understand a family that never got to be ordinary. Share in the comments where you find yourself in this story and which chapter of the Presley legacy you want to explore with care next.